35 left. These weren't gourmet. These were survival dinners made by people who worked 50-hour weeks for minimum wage. Your grandfather ate chicken fried steak on Christmas. You eat $40 steaks on random Tuesdays. That's the difference between necessity and privilege. Keep going. Stand in Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 24th, 1974, and watch him frying bologna. He'd slice thick rounds of bologna, the kind that came in a chub from the butcher, and fry them until the edges curled up and the center puffed like a bowl. He'd fry diced potatoes in the same skillet, letting them soak up the bologna grease. The dinner cost $1 and fed 6 people. The bologna tasted rich and salty, with crispy edges and a juicy center. The potatoes were crispy and savory from the bologna fat. Fried bologna and potatoes disappeared by 1983 when people decided bologna was cheap and low class. Oscar Mayer stopped making thick-sliced bologna, and the tradition died with working-class families who weren't ashamed to fry it. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25th, 1978, and watch him making fish sticks from scratch. He'd cut frozen fish fillets into strips, dredge them in flour, dip them in beaten egg, coat them in breadcrumbs, and fry them in hot oil until golden. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The fish sticks were crispy outside, flaky inside, tasting like real fish instead of processed sticks from a box. Homemade fish sticks disappeared by 1984 when Gorton's frozen fish sticks became so cheap and convenient that nobody saw the point of making them from scratch. The tradition died when frozen fish sticks became the only version anyone knew, and homemade fish sticks were forgotten entirely. Stand beside Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 24th, 1975, and watch her making American goulash. She'd brown ground beef with diced onions, drain the grease, then add a can of tomato soup, a can of diced tomatoes, and cooked elbow macaroni. She'd simmer everything together, adding salt, pepper, and paprika. The dinner cost $1.25 and fed 8 people. It tasted tomatoey, beefy, and slightly sweet from the tomato soup. American goulash didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided it was too everyday and started calling it slop. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to cook fancy meals on holidays instead of the foods they'd always eaten. Walk into Grandpa Bill's Tennessee kitchen on December 25th, 1975, and watch him making salt pork with greens. He'd slice salt pork into thick pieces and fry them in a cast-iron skillet until crispy like bacon. He'd remove the pork, then add fresh collard greens, or turnip greens, to the hot grease, along with a little water, and simmer them for an hour until tender. The greens cooked in the pork grease and became rich and savory. The dinner cost 50 cents and fed 6 people. The salt pork was intensely salty and fatty, melting in your mouth like bacon. The greens were tender, smoky, and rich from the pork grease. You'd serve it with cornbread to soak up the pot liquor, the flavorful liquid left in the bottom of the pot. Salt pork with greens disappeared by 1984 when grocery stores stopped selling salt pork, and people decided it was too salty and too greasy. The tradition died when Southern foodways became regional instead of universal, and younger generations stopped eating greens cooked in pork grease. Grandpa Bill stopped making it for Christmas in 1982 when his doctor told him to stop eating so much salt, even though he'd eaten salt pork his entire life and lived to be 87 years old. Stand in Grandpa Joe's Michigan Lake Cottage kitchen on December 24th, 1976, and watch him frying perch. He'd ice-fished for perch in December, caught a bucketful, filleted them immediately, and kept them frozen until Christmas. On Christmas Eve, he'd dredge the perch fillets in seasoned flour and fry them in hot oil until golden and crispy. Perch were small, Each fillet was only a few inches long, so each person got 5 or 6 fillets. The dinner cost nothing because he'd caught the fish himself, and it fed 6 people. Perch were sweet and delicate, with a mild flavor and flaky texture. The flour coating made them crispy and helped them hold together during frying. Fried perch didn't disappear entirely. Michigan still loves perch, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, fewer working-class families ice-fished for food, and perch became something you ordered at fish fries, not something you caught and fried at home. The tradition died when fishing went from necessity to hobby, and wild-caught fish became too much work when you could buy frozen fish sticks instead. Grandpa Joe stopped serving perch at Christmas in 1983 when his family said they'd rather have store-bought shrimp, even though fresh-caught perch was infinitely better. Liver with onions. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25, 1977, and watch him frying beef liver with onions for Christmas dinner. He'd slice beef liver thin, soak it in milk for an hour to remove the bitter taste, dredge it in seasoned flour, and fry it quickly in hot bacon grease. No more than 2 minutes per side, or it would turn grainy. He'd fry sliced onions in the same skillet until caramelized and pile them on top of the liver. The dinner cost $1 and fed 6 people because liver was one of the cheapest cuts you could buy. The liver tasted rich and iron-heavy, with a texture that was soft and tender when cooked correctly. The onions were sweet and caramelized, cutting through the liver's intensity. Fried beef liver with onions disappeared by 1983 when people decided liver was disgusting, and butchers stopped displaying it in meat cases. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat organ meats, and liver became something only old people ate. Grandpa Frank stopped making it for Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren gagged at the smell and refused to sit at the table while he cooked it, even though liver had been a nutritious, affordable protein for his family through the Depression, and he believed wasting any part of the animal was sinful. 45 dinners erased. 5 left. These used organ meats, wild game, salt pork, things your grandfather hunted, trapped, and bought because they cost almost nothing. He fed families on food you throw away. That's the difference between survival and waste. Here are the last 5. Walk into Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him making smothered pork chops. He'd brown, thick-cut pork chops in a skillet, remove them, then make gravy by frying sliced onions, adding flour and milk. The pork chops went back into the gravy, covered, and simmered until tender. The dinner cost $1.75 and fed 6 people. The pork chops were fall-apart tender, and the gravy was thick, oniony, and rich. Smothered pork chops didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1985, people decided smothered dishes were too Southern and too heavy. The tradition died when lighter, healthier cooking replaced rich gravy-based meals. Stand in Grandpa Bill's Tennessee kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him frying ham slices. He'd fry thick slices of country ham until the edges were crispy, remove them, then pour strong black coffee into the hot grease. The coffee and grease combined into red-eye gravy, a thin, dark gravy with a sheen of oil on top. He'd serve the ham and gravy over biscuits. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The ham was intensely salty and fatty, and the red-eye gravy was bitter from the coffee, salty from the ham grease, and slightly sweet. Fried ham with red-eye gravy disappeared by 1984 when country ham stopped being sold in grocery stores, and younger Southerners decided it was too salty and too greasy. 20 dinners down, 30 left. Every single one used the cheapest cuts of meat available. Bologna, country ham, cube steak, ground beef. Your grandfather made them taste like luxury. You pay luxury prices for average food. That's what happens when you forget how to cook. Keep going. Walk into Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch her making beef stew. She'd cube a cheap cut of beef, brown it, then simmer it with potatoes, carrots, onions, and canned tomatoes for 3 hours. She'd open a can of refrigerated biscuits and drop them on top of the stew, then bake until the biscuits were golden. The dinner cost $2 and fed 8 people. The beef was tender, the vegetables soft, the broth thick, and the biscuits fluffy and buttery. Beef stew with biscuits on top didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided stew was too casual for holidays. The tradition died when one-pot meals became unfancy. Stand beside Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 24, 1973, and watch him making oxtail stew. Oxtails were the tails of cattle, cut into segments with meat clinging to the bone. They were cheap because nobody wanted them. He'd brown the oxtails in a Dutch oven, then add onions, carrots, potatoes, tomatoes, and beef broth. The stew simmered on the stovetop for 4 hours until the meat fell off the bones and the broth turned rich and gelatinous from the collagen. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. Oxtails tasted rich, beefy, and gelatinous, with the meat tender and falling off the bone. The broth was thick and flavorful, almost like gravy. You ate oxtails with your hands, sucking the meat and marrow off the bones. Oxtail stew disappeared by 1985 when oxtails became expensive. They went from 50 cents a pound to $8 a pound when chefs discovered them and put them on fancy restaurant menus. The tradition died when the cheapest cuts of meat became luxury items, and working-class families who'd been eating oxtails for generations couldn't afford them anymore. Grandpa Earl stopped making oxtail stew for Christmas in 1984 when the price tripled, and he switched to chuck roast instead, which was cheaper but nowhere near as flavorful or tender. Walk into Grandpa Bill's North Carolina kitchen on December 25, 1978, and watch him frying pig's feet. He'd buy pickled pig's feet in jars from the grocery store for 75 cents, drain them, coat them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until the skin was crispy and golden. Pig's feet were mostly skin, fat, and bone, with very little meat, but the skin turned into crispy, gelatinous bites when fried properly. The dinner cost $1 and fed 4 people. Pig's feet tasted rich, fatty, and gelatinous, with a texture that was chewy and slightly crunchy from the fried skin. You ate them with your hands, gnawing the meat and fat off the bones. They were an acquired taste. You either loved them or hated them. Fried pig's feet disappeared by 1983 when grocery stores stopped selling pickled pig's feet in jars, and people decided eating feet was disgusting. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat anything that still looked like the animal it came from. Grandpa Bill stopped making pig's feet for Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren said they looked gross and asked why he was eating dog food, even though pig's feet had been a delicacy for him his entire life and the only meat his family could afford during the Depression. Stand beside Grandpa Joe's Detroit kitchen on December 24, 1975, and watch him making Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy. He'd shape ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs into oval patties, fry them, then make gravy by frying sliced mushrooms, adding flour and beef broth. The patties simmered in the gravy. The dinner cost $2 and fed 6 people. The Salisbury steaks were savory and tender, and the mushroom gravy was rich and earthy. Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy disappeared by 1984 when people decided making gravy from scratch was too much work and started using canned gravy instead. The tradition died when shortcuts replaced homemade. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him frying chicken livers. He'd rinse the livers, pat them dry, dredge them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until crispy outside but still slightly pink inside. The dinner cost 50 cents and fed 6 people. The chicken livers tasted rich, iron-heavy, and slightly creamy inside. Fried chicken livers disappeared by 1983 when people decided organ meats were disgusting. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat livers, and they vanished from grocery stores. Grandpa Frank stopped making them in 1980 when his grandchildren gagged at the smell and refused to sit at the table. Stand in Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch her making poor man's steak. She'd mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, an egg, an onion soup mix, shape it into a rectangle, then bake it in a loaf pan. After baking, she'd slice it into steaks and serve them with gravy. The dinner cost $1.25 and fed 8 people. The poor man's steak tasted like meatloaf, but denser, with the onion soup mix adding savory flavor. Poor man's steak disappeared by 1985 when people decided calling food poor man's was embarrassing. The tradition died when working-class families started trying to hide their poverty instead of embracing foods that fed them. Walk into Grandpa Frank's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 24, 1974, and watch him cooking beef tongue. He'd buy a beef tongue from the butcher for $1. Nobody else wanted it. He'd simmer it in water with onions and bay leaves for 3 hours until tender. After cooling slightly, he'd peel off the thick outer skin, slice the tongue thin, and fry the slices in butter. He'd make gravy from the cooking liquid by whisking in flour and butter. The dinner cost $1 and fed 8 people. Beef tongue tasted rich and beefy, with a texture that was tender and slightly grainy, similar to pot roast, but more flavorful. The gravy was thick and savory. Most people couldn't tell it was tongue if you didn't tell them. It just tasted like really good beef. Beef tongue disappeared by 1983 when butchers stopped selling it and people decided eating tongue was disgusting. The tradition died when younger generations refused to eat organ meats or anything that reminded them the meat came from an animal. Grandpa Frank stopped making tongue for Christmas in 1980 when his grandchildren found out what it was and refused to eat another bite, even though they'd been happily eating it for years without knowing and had always said it was delicious. Walk into Grandpa Joe's Detroit Chinatown neighborhood kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him frying chicken feet. Chicken feet were sold at the Chinese market for almost nothing, 10 cents a pound. He'd clean the feet, remove the outer skin by blanching them in boiling water, clip off the nails, then marinate them in soy sauce, ginger, and garlic. He'd fry them in hot oil until crispy, then braise them in the marinade until tender. The dinner cost 25 cents and fed 4 people. Chicken feet were mostly skin, tendons, and bone, with almost no meat. They tasted like concentrated chicken flavor with a gelatinous texture from the collagen. Walk into Grandpa Bill's Ohio Irish kitchen on December 25, 1977, and watch him making boiled dinner. He'd simmer a corned beef brisket in water for 3 hours, then add quartered cabbage, potatoes, carrots, and onions. Everything cooked together until tender. The dinner cost $2.50 and fed 10 people. The corned beef was salty and tender, the cabbage sweet, the vegetables soft. Boiled dinner didn't disappear entirely, but serving it for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided boiled food was bland and boring. The tradition died when roasting replaced boiling, and simple cooking methods became unsophisticated. 25 dinners gone, halfway there. These used organ meats, ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs, and boiled dinners nobody wanted to admit they ate. Your grandfather fed families on $2. You can't feed yourself on 20. That's what happens when survival skills die. Let's finish this. Stand beside Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen on December 24, 1975, and watch her making stuffed bell peppers. She'd cut the tops off bell peppers, remove the seeds, Then stuff them with a mixture of browned ground beef, cooked rice, tomato sauce, and diced onion. The peppers went into a baking dish with a little water at the bottom, covered with foil, and baked until tender. The dinner cost $1.50 and fed 6 people. The peppers were soft and sweet, the filling savory and tomatoey. Stuffed bell peppers didn't disappear entirely, but serving them for Christmas dinner did. By 1984, people decided they were too everyday. The tradition died when working-class comfort foods became unfancy. V walk into Grandpa Earl's Kentucky kitchen on December 25, 1976, and watch him making cube steak with gravy. He'd dredge cube steak in seasoned flour, fry it in a skillet until browned, remove it, then make gravy by whisking flour into the hot oil and adding milk. The steaks simmered in the gravy. The dinner cost $1.75 and fed 6 people. The cube steak was tender from the pounding, and the gravy was thick and peppery. Cube steak with gravy disappeared by 1985 when people decided tenderized meat was cheap. The tradition died when working-class cuts of meat became shameful.